16th, 2023 Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. We want to welcome those of you who are with us here at the courthouse and also those who are joining us online. Some of you may be here to provide public comment. The Board of Douglas County Commissioners welcomes public comment and in advance thanks you for following these procedures. Each action item on the agenda will offer an opportunity for relevant public comment about that topic. We ask that you wait until the agenda item you're here for comes up for discussion. Comments related to agenda items are welcome after the board has had an opportunity to discuss the topic. The Board of County Commissioners will invite comments on topics not included in the agenda during our general public comment section, which is directly after the consent agenda. This is a time for addressing issues not on today's agenda, but related to the general business of the Douglas County Commission. We'll first call on folks who are here in person, and then we'll turn to any online commenters who are here with us tonight. If you're here on Zoom, please plan to use the raise your hand function when the time comes and listen for staff to call your name. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask everyone to give their full name and Douglas County residence for our meeting minutes. All public comments should be directed to the Douglas County Commission. Campaigning for public office is not allowed. We also reserve the right to mute or remove any speaker who is vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. The public should also know that comments received by the Commission during our meetings do not represent the views of Douglas County government. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share their screen. Please know that online participants will not be able to view them without a computer, smartphone, or tablet during tonight's meeting. Materials are published online for your reference also. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on our YouTube page and website. We have 3 items to start out with on our consent agenda. Then we'll take regular general public comment. It's not called regular general public comment. It's just called general public comment. Then we have 2 regular agenda items. First is a neighborhood revitalization request. And then the next one is update from our zoning and codes department on temporary business use. And we'll do appointments and commissioner or administrator miscellaneous before we adjourn. Commissioners, would either of you like to pull an item on our consent agenda for further discussion? Any member of the public like to pull an item from our consent agenda for further discussion? Anyone online? Okay. And with that, I'd take a motion.
Commissioner Reed moved to approve consent agenda items 1.1 through 1.3.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Passes 3-0. We'll move on to general public comment. Is anyone here to provide general public comment to the commission tonight? Anyone online? Okay. Oh, Michael. Good evening, Michael. Michael, you got to hit that button. And when the light turns green, there you go.
Great, thank you. Michael Allman, speaking for myself tonight. A week ago today, you probably know, and maybe you've checked into it, the Planning Commission had a study session on the pending wind energy regulations. Very interesting meeting. They're making progress. This was the committee, the subcommittee, I guess, who's working on it, 4-member subcommittee, and they reported on their design standards, performance standards, things that they were coming up with at the time. They anticipate that they might have something ready later this year, October, November. But when this whole discussion started earlier this year, maybe even late last year, the scope of the work was for industrial scale wind and personal wind. There was some mention, just almost to in an aside, about what personal scale, homestead scale wind was. And everything since then, including last Wednesday, is entirely focused on industrial scale, which is important, of course. It's probably the most concerning to most people in the county. Nevertheless, what was more noteworthy was what was missing, which is community scale. When the county adopted the solar regulations, Ms. Willie understands this fully, it included the mid-range community solar as well. And I anticipated, and I think others I've talked to at least anticipated, that the wind regulations would be similar, that we would have personal, mid-size, and utility scale. I asked the staff about this, who's writing the regulations. They said 1 minute to go. Okay. They said that it's not in their scope and that I had nothing to say about that. However, staff, I feel, it's inappropriate for them to limit the options of what individuals or corporations or the community wants to build. Why should they be choosing to exclude community scale? Community scale is locally owned, locally financed, locally managed. And I would request that you tell staff that they include in their scope of work community scale, which there are states around the country whose regulations have this all over the place. It's very common. They can't themselves limit the choices. I think it's your job to either choose to limit our choices or tell them to include the scope, expand the scope. Thank you.
Any other public comment? General public comment? Anyone online? Okay, we'll close general public comment and move to our regular agenda item. The first is a neighborhood revitalization, or what's known as an NRA, to redevelop an office headquarters at approximately 700 New Hampshire Street. Hey, Sam.
There we go. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Sam Camp. I'm the Economic Development Analyst with the City of Lawrence. And tonight we're here to discuss a neighborhood revitalization area incentive request at 700 New Hampshire. For common reference, that is the old Borders bookstore in downtown Lawrence. So just a quick overview of the presentation we're going to walk through tonight. So it's a project overview. The project will be built on one lot that has been dilapidated for a relatively lengthy period of time, roughly over a decade. Plans call for a complete interior remodel, construction of a second-story addition, adding approximately 30,000 square feet of usable space back into the downtown area. The table up at the top can show that split of about 20,000 on the first floor and 10,000 on the second floor. Again, the incentive request for tonight is a 15-year, 65% NRA rebate. And just as a reminder, a neighborhood revitalization area is a property tax rebate program. It applies to incremental valuation only, and the base property value is shielded. So essentially, the property owner continues to pay the property taxes on that base value, and the remaining percentage not included in the rebate, so that 35%. Commissioner Kelly, I know we had discussed questions. Would you like me to answer them now or at the end of the presentation?
Why don't you go ahead and do your presentation,
Okay.
and then we'll answer some questions.
Of course. So here's more of a visual representation of what that means. So as you can see on the bar graph, the blue represents the base taxes, the red represents the incremental, and then the green is the NRA rebate. So if you want to consider what the city, county, and school board are receiving, it would be the red and blue bars. So again, the approximate base tax payment across all three taxing jurisdictions throughout the base of that 15 years is approximately $87,000. The approximate collected increment, so that red piece across all three districts, is between 16 and 23,000 from beginning to end. And then the approximate tax rebate at 65% would be 29,000 to 44,000, again, beginning to end of the rebate period. Just as a reminder, some past projects that the city, county, and school board have all approved together. The most similar to this particular project is likely the 1040 Vermont project. That was a commercial redevelopment of a previous building that is now currently home to the Trainer architect firm, as well as 1106 Rhode Island, which is again another commercial, as well as a historical rehab, which is now home to Hernley Associates. So as part of the city's technical review, this includes a cost benefit analysis. So essentially what we're looking at for the county is a 1.78 cost benefit ratio. The IRB sales tax exemption, which was approved at the city level already, is a sales tax exemption on construction and labor. For the county's portion, that would be approximately $5,800. And then the collection of the NRA rebate over 15 years, which is the amount the applicant would receive, is approximately $220,000. For the financial or but-for analysis, the National Development Council, who provides that analysis for the city, their final analysis and underwriting report indicate that the incentive request is reasonable. To caveat, this report was done when their original request was 90%. But still decreasing that request still makes it a reasonable request because they're receiving less than they would have initially. So it's reasonable to alleviate the challenges with construction and debt service of the upfront costs. Some additional considerations as far as in alignment with the city, it aligns with the city's economic development policy, the downtown master plan, and Plan 2040, the city's comprehensive master plan. It meets the community goals of increasing readaptive use of currently empty buildings, as well as providing employment creation. Within the first year or two of redeveloping and occupying this facility, First Management and First Construction look to add a combination of 21 new jobs across both businesses with a salary range of $50,000 to $120,000. This is also a redevelopment of a historically underutilized parcel back into productive use. Again, this parcel has sat vacant for approximately a decade, as well as preservation of historic components. That would be the historic livery wall on the north side. When the applicant comes up to give their presentation, they have some photos that they can show you all. So recommendations, again, city staff believes that the project meets the requirements for the NRA and achieves the city's goals. At the Public Incentives Review Committee, and again, when PERC received this request, it was at the initial 90% request, the NRA request. That vote was 2-3 against the motion to recommend to the City Commission. At the City Commission, they voted 3-2 for the 15-year 65% NRA. And then on Monday night, the USD 497 school board voted 4-3 for participating in the NRA at 15 years, for 15 years at 65%. So tonight for the County Commission, what you're considering is the county's participation in the NRA once the area is established. The area is established on second reading of the ordinance, which is planned for August 22nd at the August 22nd City Commission meeting. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. So I'm happy to answer questions, or the applicant also has a presentation if you'd like to see that beforehand.
Commissioners, what's your preference? Do you want to offer questions to Sam first, or? Don't have a preference.
I'm okay either way. Waiting for the applicant to come back in the room.
Yeah, why don't we do some questions for Sam first, and
No problem.
Sam, I appreciate your patience. I am going to ask you, you're very kind in answering some of my questions very quickly, and I appreciate that. But I want to go over some of them just so for our discussion, they'll be talked about. The one that I'm trying to understand is this idea of a shielded value, right? So if we have an appraised value that's shielded, that amount doesn't go up or down. It stays the same no matter what. Is that correct?
No, so it sometimes shielded, and then sometimes the other word that's used is frozen. Those are maybe misnomers.
Mhm.
In the response that I sent you, it would essentially be like a cap. So as long as the property value meets or exceeds the base value that was set before construction started, you would continue to receive the tax value at that level. So for instance, let's say the property is appraised at $1,000 at the base. And then for next year, for whatever reason, or after the project is completed, the appraised value is now like $900. You would not receive the tax value at $1,000. It would be 900 because that 1,000 represents a cap. You won't lose any less when that value increases, but when it decreases, if it were to ever decrease below that value for whatever reason, housing market, commercial market crashes or something, it's kind of, all bets are off. You end up losing that value no matter what. So that's shielded, maybe a misnomer if that's what comes to mind.
And so then the NRA is the assessed value or the appraised value beyond that, beyond that shielded amount, and that is determined annually, or it's determined over a 15-year projection?
Nope. So it's determined annually. In the NRA plan, which I believe was in the application material, it essentially spells out every year when the appraiser does their valuation. And we work with the county appraiser's office. That's part of the cooperative agreement with the city, county, and school board. The applicant then has to submit an NRA rebate application, basically saying the county appraiser has done their annual evaluation. We paid our taxes for the year. That's also part of the agreement. We are now ready to receive our rebate. So it's done on an annual basis, not an average over 15 years or not at the end of 15 years. It's an annual rebate.
So here's the point, and I see Brad Eldridge is here and he might help with this as well. Here's what I'm trying to get at is the NRA is for everything. We've seen significant jumps in appraisal values recently. I don't know if those will continue or if they will stop, but the way an NRA works is that it is only if that appraisal value jumps, everything that jumps on it is within that NRA value. Is that making sense?
So you're talking about like if there was a jump, because I think I've had this conversation with Brad before, in terms of if there was a jump that is not accounted for with regards to the building, no. There's no, as far as I understand, there's no differentiation between like general market increase and the value that the property, the redevelopment or addition, whatever happens to that property, there's really no differentiation. So any value that's increased above that cap is then captured under the NRA.
So would it be fair to say that for a developer or any property owner, having an NRA on your property could be a very good tool in a volatile market to managing your taxes because of that volatility?
So maybe my answer will kind of get at what you're thinking.
Yeah.
So in the NRA plan, it is a requirement that the applicant pull a building permit within 1 year. Like it's pulled and it's ready to go and they have to start construction, and then they finish construction within 2 years of the inaction of the NRA. So no, they can't just sit there for 10 years, let their property not do anything on it, let their property increase through natural market forces and then decide to develop. They have to do what they said they were going to do, essentially, within a reasonable time frame.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Sam, do you want to pull up the graph so that we're all kind of looking at that? So what Commissioner Kelly was getting at was the 87,000 starting point is the 87,000 base tax, even 15 years out. And yes, we capture in addition the 35%, which is in the red. So I'm following where he's going in terms of that. If nothing happened to that property, it wouldn't still be bringing in 87,000 in tax revenue at the end of 15 years. It would continue to grow as our land values increase. So that's one point. There's another one I'd like to make, and that was it made me start questioning or wondering if we were starting from the right place. So I went back and looked at some historic kind of tax payments on the property while it's been vacant, and they were really kind of all over the place. So I'll probably pull some questions from Brad Eldridge since he's here, and I had some kind of back and forth through email, kind of asking some questions about that because it was as high. It was as low as 60,000, and I can pull those numbers, or as high as 120,000 annual taxes on that property as vacant. So just trying to see, is that 87,000 the right starting point since we're locking it in for 15 years? So that's a question that either you can respond to or the applicant, and I can certainly get some more background data from our appraiser.
Yeah, so what I understand is when we were working with the applicant last year when this process started, they were in the process of obtaining the property from their development group, and at that time they had done an appeal to the appraised value. So that's why there's a depression. I think it went from like 100,000, like in tax revenue. I don't remember the appraised and assessed value off the top of my head, but it went from about approximately like 100,000, a little over 100,000, down to 80,000 because there was an appeal done and the property was reassessed. So that's why you saw that jump down from 2021 to 22. I believe that was when it dropped down.
And it was a pretty significant drop. It was actually followed a couple of years later by a significant increase. So I said it's been really volatile. It's not just one narrative. I think there are several things going on that we can get some more information about, and that does happen. You're allowed to ask for a reevaluation, and then that goes to our appraiser's office. So I just wanted to get kind of the full story and the picture of what happened there. When you talk about the property changing hands, it did change hands from a development group that included the buyer. So kind of both sides of that. So that's less of a good data point for me in terms of helping to evaluate what that property value should be. So I think we can wait and get those numbers from Brad, or see if the applicant would like to address that when we get him up here.
Yeah, when they come up here, they can speak a little better about that.
I might add, and Sam, you can correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of the NRA statute is my understanding of the NRA statute though is that the base year is the year they apply. So I don't know that we can go back and say 2021 is the year we want to use because of the limitations of the statute. At least that's my understanding.
The way that I understand it is before construction begins, and it's one of the documents in the NRA plan, they have to essentially call the appraiser's office to come and do like I'm starting construction tomorrow. You need to tell me the exact value today. That document is recorded and submitted and then uploaded. So then that base value is what's used. I think there are some specific timing issues. I know November 1st is the day that pops into my head.
I think Brad can provide more information. I'm not sure we do a specific reappraisal every time, but yeah.
Okay.
I'll ask another quick question if you let me. So in terms of the other process, other projects that have had NRA, all of those were agreed upon the same amount by city, county, and school district. Is that correct?
Not all of them.
Yeah, I think there's one from a long time ago that does not include the school district. I'd have to go back and look at each of them.
Britt Kromkano, the economic development director, has a little more history on some of these projects.
Thank you, Britt.
This is Commissioner Reed, I just want to tack on to that question a little bit and ask if, I don't expect you to recall exact years, but if you can give some general timelines to at least some of these recent NRA projects that are listed on here, like the 1040 Vermont that you said is close to this one, and the more recent ones, approximately, how long ago were those?
Yeah, to answer the first question, Commissioners, I believe the project that was voted differently on was the 826 Pennsylvania Street project. That's where the Lawrence Beer Company is at right now. If I recall right, I think the city and the school district voted for a lower percentage and the county voted for a higher percentage. I want to say the city and the school district voted for a 50%, and I'm not sure what the term was on that one. And the county voted for an 85% participation rate in that. So that's the only one I'm recalling that there was a difference in how they voted. And that is totally allowed. Everybody has to decide, each taxing jurisdiction gets to decide, one, do you want to participate at all? And two, if you do want to participate, at what level? So hopefully that answers the first question. The second question, I think the most recent one we've done is the 826 Pennsylvania Street. And, COVID really slowed everything down when it came to all projects kind of moving through the pipeline. And so we're just now starting to see this kick back up. We've got several in the pipeline NRAs that you'll be also considering. But that I think is the most recent one. And I think that got approved.
Penn Street Loss is the most recent one. That's
Oh,
the
I'm sorry.
that's the affordable housing development
Right.
in the Warehouse Arts District. The Penn Street Lofts and Ninedale Lofts have a 15-year abatement period, and the rest of those have a 10-year period. So they're all within the last decade, from about 2015 on.
1040 Vermont is one of the oldest, if not the oldest. And I think it actually came off of its
That one-
incentive period last year.
Got it. Thank you. Just from like vague memories, at first I read this graph as sort of assumed it was in chronological order. And then I was like, no, that doesn't really track with my memories. And so I mostly was just curious to understand sort of the pace at which this city has been recommending NRAs and about how long, but as a commissioner for the past close to 3 years, I don't remember any City of Lawrence NRAs too recently. I think these are all pre
The
2020.
Penn Street Lofts was, I think, officially considered, or that process began in late 2019. And then in the start of 2020 is when COVID happened. So that one dragged on. So the governing bodies have not really considered an NRA to this length in about 4 years. So that's maybe why there's a gap in recollection.
Thank you. Just curious. And then my other question was, our memo, I don't think mentioned anything, and you didn't really mention anything, Sam, in your presentation about the IRB. Is that a city-only request, or is that a part of the request that's in front of us? Because in the chart, the cost benefit analysis, there is an amount.
Yeah,
for the
so
county.
the technical report is kind of a broad document for all governing bodies. The IRB, the Industrial Revenue Bond Incentive, again, is a mechanism for the applicant, for them and able to get a sales tax exemption on construction materials and labor. That is an incentive that is only considered at the city level. It's only required for the city to kind of enact and pass that. However, it does require the applicant to go through the Public Incentives Review Committee, which does have representation from the county on it.
So that 5,883 number that's in your slide, is that just representative of what, if the city approved the IRB, that's the sales tax implication for the county sales tax?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm curious if, just on like a question about process with PERC in particular. So all NRA requests go through PERC, correct? Before they come to any governing bodies?
Yes, except for per city economic development policy. sorry, no, apologies. Yes, they all go through. I was thinking of a different exemption, but it's nothing to do with PERC. I apologize.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to verify that I had that fact right. And is it typical? So you mentioned that the vote from the PERC committee was based on a request that was a 90% rebate program, and that vote was for denial. Is there any mechanism in the process that would have or should have sent that back through PERC, or is it common that the amounts change from the applicant or from what the city is recommending? I just purely from a process standpoint curious about
Yeah.
why
So
it didn't go back through PERC.
So I'll say maybe two things. One, so PERC is an advisory board. They're not like maybe some of the other city bodies where if it stops at them, it goes back and forth until they get approval and then it goes to the city commission. PERC is an advisory board, so no matter what, it will move on to the city commission. The second thing I would say is I don't think it's typical. I don't think any of these projects received a no vote or a non-recommendation from PERC and then maybe changed or updated. But I would say that is an opportunity for partially the public and the county and the school board to kind of weigh in. And so if the applicant is responsive to that, where they see that there's a strong disagreement or dislike for their original proposal, it seems to make sense that they would come back, reevaluate at what their project can maybe a bare minimum move forward with, or what is more tangible for them to do, and then move forward to the city commission with an updated request based on PERC feedback and from the public. So that does not generally happen, but that is kind of that would be an accepted practice.
Thanks for the context.
Mhm.
Those are the only questions I have for now.
Sam, can you go back to the chart that has all the colors on it?
Yep.
So I want to make sure that my math is correct here, because I think sometimes these reports, as you mentioned, sort of are broad and they lump multiple government entities into the same thing.
Mhm.
And so it's hard to get a true projection of what is, to do essentially a cost benefit analysis or an ROI for the county. It's important to sort of look specifically at what the impacts are to Douglas County.
Mhm.
So through some emails today, the percentage of this is about 30. So if you look at everything above the blue, the percentage of that impacts the county is about 38% of that total amount, was my calculations based on what you sent me earlier. So when I say 38%, when you combine the city, the county, and the school district, 38% comes from the county, right? And so when I apply that to those red and green bars, my understanding, if I do that 16,000 to 23,000, the amount of taxes that we're going to collect, if we do this NRA and they make the changes through this, is between $6,000 and $8,000 more per year than we're currently collecting. Does that sound about right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That was some of the math that we had done earlier. And I know I think we've kind of expanded more on the tables that we provide you specifically in the report. I couldn't make it look nice in the presentation, but yeah, essentially with the city, county, and school board, the county and the school board are at roughly 30, 33, 35 up to 40. So if you look at the collected increment, just dividing that by 3, that gives you a general amount of what you're getting on top of the base.
Right. And I just think that's important, commissioners, as we talk about this, to be accurate in what the number is, because sometimes we'll hear applicants say, well, this is going to be, a financial windfall for the county. It's $6,000 is our windfall here. So, and then the amount to the applicant, what their benefit would be at the height is going to be $16,000, and at the lowest point, $11,000. So does that sound about right? I just want to make sure we're talking real numbers here, because sometimes we don't actually look at what the numbers or what the total amount of taxes are. And I think if we're trying to see what the impact to our community is, it's important to get some real numbers there.
So if you're talking about the total amount that the applicant would receive is that starting at 29,000 and moving up to 44,000. If you were to split it between the increment collected between the three bodies, it would be, a little over 5,000 for the county, a little over 5,000 for the school board, roughly 4,000 for the city. So if you want to break it out like that, yes.
Mhm. And the same is true on the applicant side too, right? I mean, the amount of taxes that they're being refunded, right, is that same equation. Am I correct? That 38% of what they're getting. So when you see there 29,000 to 44,000, the refund to the applicant would be 38% of 29,000. Am I understanding that correctly?
From the
Like the
county.
county's
From the
portion of
county,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. You have another question?
So actually, when Britt was up, she made mention that sometimes other entities choose a different percentage to participate in. Does it happen that other entities choose a different time frame? Because I'm kind of struck by the fact that the two that are at 15 years from our previous applications are both for affordable housing, and the others that have this commercial historic mix, which I'm still excited to see, are the 10-year ones. So does that happen? That I assume that is within our power to decide.
I don't think we've ever chosen a different time frame. And I was here when we did the one that was a little bit off. And I honestly think it was just simply a timing issue at the time. It was almost done. I don't know that it was, there were some timing issues about when things were approved and some things were revised on that one. I would say that each of these is hand calculated by a team in the appraiser's office, the county administrator's office, the county treasurer, and the clerk's office. So the more complicated you make it, the more likely we will make a mistake. And so I'm not sure we can, I know we've changed amounts, but I think the years might be harder to modify.
Well, and I would have to go back and look at the statutes,
Yeah.
the state statutes that govern that, because it essentially what sets that is the city ordinance that sets the neighborhood revitalization area and the plan. And that I'd have to look at the statutes and exactly what the wording in both of those documents is, but essentially it's the city saying this area will exist for 10, 15 years. But again, a lot of the tax work is done on the county side, and I wouldn't want to overburden them with some funky calculations.
Let's just put a point on that, Sam. So
Yeah.
this is the city has the authority to do that, but the county does the work. Is that what you're saying?
The county is compensated
Okay.
per the cooperative agreement. They include a modest fee for their work, which we negotiate, or we work with Sarah and the county to determine what they believe is a reasonable rate for that work.
And that fee was that $16,000 origination fee?
No, that's for the IRB. The fee, it essentially, after the rebate is calculated, a deduction is made from that. So typically in the last few IRBs, it's been about $500. So the county, when they do all that work, and let's say the rebate is for the first year $30,000, before that money is even sent out, the county deducts $500. So the rebate's now $29,500.
So Sam, in the report, there's a lot of references to dilapidation and what poor shape this building is in. And the response I got from Jeff Crick is that property maintenance code for the city of Lawrence is complaint based, right? So what Jeff shared was they've only had a few complaints back in 2019 regarding some trash and some fencing. I'm interested how your department came up with the understanding that this was a dilapidated abandoned building that needed to be revitalized based on 2 city complaints. How did you get to that point?
So at the beginning, especially for NRAs, part of that process is that the statute requires that the city commission make a finding that the property falls within one of 3 categories. All of them are quite lengthy. The summary is the property a detriment to public health, safety, or welfare, as well as a overly historic property. A portion of this property is that livery wall. I don't know if you could make the argument that that makes the entire property historic, but it essentially fell into one of those categories regarding health, safety, and welfare. Part of that includes things like development of the area, economic development of the community, and things like that. So we evaluate, we require the applicant to submit essentially a statement saying how they fall into one of those categories. And then staff and the city attorney's office review to make sure that that is accurate.
But the city, what I heard you say, and maybe I heard this wrong, the city at the time that it accepts the NRA application accepts that the reason the application can even be considered is because of the detriment to the social. I can't remember exactly.
Public health, safety, and welfare.
Public self, yeah, that.
So in the application packet, there's also the applicant includes a request letter. And at that point, we've probably met with them several times to determine, what is the project? What are you doing? A lot of the times they'll send or they'll include or show us photos of the inside of the property or around it. So we have a general understanding that yes, this property, both especially inside, I know sometimes, if it's a concrete structure or something that's stably built, exterior deterioration may not occur over time or be as evident over time. But certainly the inside, I know the applicant may be able to speak to later. I think you may have heard before, they've had some vagrancy and some vandalism regarding to the property. So again, having a vacant building sitting on, a prime corner in downtown Lawrence is not beneficial to the surrounding area. So that's kind of some of the things we evaluate when we're looking at projects like this.
Can I just add something
Yeah.
there? Yeah, commissioners, the state statute asks that it meet at least one of 3 requirements. One is if there's historic properties in the area that need to be preserved. So there's a historic component that could be justified. The other is, again, the health, safety, and welfare, but that encompasses a lot of things, including bringing a property back into productive use that is no longer productive. So I think this property catches on a couple things, but probably the strongest one is that we're not necessarily totally relying on blight to meet that state statute.
Right. I'm glad you're here because you may be able to answer my next question, which ties on to this. In your history and your recollection, has there ever been an NRA where the applicant was the owner of the property originally, it fell into neglect, and the applicant is still the owner, and now they're asking for an NRA?
I am not quite sure about this. The NRA is incredibly flexible, and we've had, and it is really what it is said to do, revitalize. It's really a revitalization tool. We've had a lot of NRAs that maybe would have went forward, but for various reasons, the applicant just couldn't make it financially work or so. There was something, the Eldridge had one that was going to go forward, and then they had some other issues that had nothing to do with the NRA, and they were going to add an addition onto their property. And if, that lot has been vacant for a long, long time. And so I'm trying to think of other things too. One of the beauty of a lot of this, the NRA, is that it is used a lot to help revitalize historic properties. So again, with things like the cider building that probably was in really, really bad condition and not used. And let's see what else. What else do we have here? 1101 Indiana Street, that was in really, really rough condition. A lot of times this tool is used to basically save property too that might be otherwise raised. I believe in this case, and the applicant can address that, I think that was the suggested route to go, is to raise the property and start over. But if you want to do any kind of preservation and try to revitalize that property, this is an excellent tool for that. So that's what it's really intended to do.
So is there any concern from the city's economic development partner that this will set a precedent of a property owner buying a property, letting it go into neglect, and then asking for an NRA to come around and rehabilitate that property?
We have never really had that happen before. I think, again, we want to be sure that the property meets the state statute. I know there was one property, and again, it didn't go forward because the developer couldn't make it work financially, but they had bought a piece of property and sat on it and sat on it and sat on it, and then wanted to come forward with an NRA. And I think they ended up planting trees or something on it, ag trees or something, because they couldn't make it work. But maybe that's the closest. We really just haven't had a situation where that happens.
So this is a pretty unique situation, and you didn't answer my question. I just want to give you one more opportunity to answer it. Does this set up a precedent for the future that you would be concerned about?
Well, in this particular case, I think the applicant can address the history. I don't think he just sat on this property on purpose.
Okay.
So I would say probably not. I'm not really concerned about this property and that being the motivation behind this NRA. And we've never had that happen again. I think people who take things on with the NRA are usually, it's kind of a difficult deal to make work anyway. The beauty is typically the taxing jurisdictions don't lose out because they're at least getting what they got before. And then they usually get a little extra. And then what I see the NRA really coming into play, and it's hard sometimes to think about it, but bringing on long-term real estate investments, because real estate usually does have a longer life than the incentive period that they're asking for. And real estate takes such a long time to bring to the community anyway. And it's commercial real estate is our best tool for generating property tax revenues. So it's a great tool in terms of adding to our stock, but you kind of have to think of it as a long-term investment. So it's really popular. It's one of our more popular tools. Again, you're going to be seeing it used in various ways coming forward. And this happens to be an economic development project, but it'll be used for community benefit projects as well.
Thanks.
Wait, can I ask you a question? I'm just a little bit of mental math here, but it looks like the 10 years or so that the property's been vacant and owned by the owner or the development group, that the amount of taxes paid during that time is probably greater than the incentive that's coming back. So I don't know that there's a cost benefit. I don't think there's a benefit for kind of what was suggested, like holding a property on purpose in order to go through this fund process and get a rebate.
I
Would
think
that
that's
be-
probably right. I would guess that to be right because the most significant part of property taxes is on the building as is.
And the
so,
land.
yeah.
Mhm. You had made mention of that the recommendation had been to raise that building, including the historic livery wall. Recommended by whom? Was that
I
downtown
think
master
Doug
plan?
can maybe answer that. I'm not sure if it was the planning division or who, or maybe it was just his stakeholders that said it would be easier. And typically it is less expensive to just knock these buildings down and start over. But he's a developer. He can certainly speak to that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff before we have a developer presentation? Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Britt.
Yeah, but
Good evening, commissioners. Thanks for giving us time to present our proposal. And I'm just going to give a little brief history on the company and stuff, but I'm going to answer all those questions you all were asking. I thought it was a good night since it's dad's night that I bring my 4-year-old down to see what their dad has to do all the time. So, but they did bring their iPads. So I'm Doug Compton. I founded First Management, the property management company, in 1991 with 6 employees. In 2005, I formed First Construction, which is our construction wing of First Management. 33 years later, we've got over 80 employees, and we actually need to hire more employees, but we don't have the space to put more. But we have people doubled up in offices now. So that was a good fit for the borders. Is that slide 2? Slide 2, or the Borders building is 700 New Hampshire Street. We've identified the Borders building for new joint headquarters for First Management, First Construction. The building has been abandoned since 2011. We've had 3 projects for that building, 3 different grocery stores. And I can get into that later, but you were asking earlier about why wasn't it maintained? Well, it was under contract 3 times from 2011 till COVID came along. The building sits on the northwest corner of 7th and New Hampshire Street. It's actually the northeast corner. And it's a half of a city block long, as you can see there on the slide. Slide 4 is a livery stable wall. We're going to preserve and incorporate that into the remodel of our building. As you can see in the photo, the wall's in poor condition. I don't think it really was constructed properly when Borders did their original renovation. So we're going to go in there and make the necessary reinforcements to make sure that it's a safe and basically just so it's safe. Interior, so the graffiti, let's back up to that because I want to touch on that. So, we remove graffiti all the time. I've got multiple other buildings in downtown. As fast as we remove the graffiti or paint over the graffiti, it comes back the next day, the next week. So I don't want anyone to think that we've neglected the graffiti on that building, because we haven't. I mean, I could bring in the work orders that get called in on that property that I get billed personally from the property management company to remove graffiti off those buildings. So the history, that's the inside of the building. Nothing's changed since Borders was in there. When they moved out, that's exactly what it looked like. And so it looks like that today. 2011 Borders closed. 2015, an investment group that I was a part of purchased the building. In December 2016, we had a grocery store signed up, a Price Chopper, and we got sued by a neighbor in Hobbs Taylor Loft. In 2017 is actually when Price Choppers commits the grocery store, and they were going to do apartments above the grocery store, and 15% of that was going to be affordable housing. June 2017, the neighbors lost their lawsuit at district court level, and they appealed. In August 2017, the application was filed with the city to proceed with the grocery store. In May of 2018, the neighbors lost their lawsuit at the Court of Appeals, and they appealed to the Supreme Court. In March 2020, COVID came along, and all of their potential grocery stores were not opening new grocery stores because of COVID. And then in June 2020, the neighbors lost at the Supreme Court. September of 2022, which is almost a year ago now, I bought all the other partners out of the building. So the building became 100% my responsibility almost 12 months to the date. The restoration of the building, we're going to retain the overall character of the property, retain the existing footprint to avoid encroaching and joining the residential neighborhood. The restoration of the existing, including tuck pointing and painting, a new roof, mechanical and electrical, addition of a second story inside without changing the exterior of the building. We're going to preserve and repair the historic livery wall. We're in compliance with the guidelines of the Downtown Lawrence Master Plan and Horizon 2040. Sustainability, we're repurposing the existing building. On the slide, you can see just some of the sustainability methods that we're using during construction. Diversity, our construction company now, we usually employ 26% of our subcontractors to be minority owned and or women owned. We'll be using a lot of these same subcontractors on this project. When it comes to jobs, it'll be 25% growth for first management, first construction staff, 7 full-time employees with salaries ranging from 90 to 120 grand, 14 full-time employees with salaries ranging from $50 to $70,000. During construction, there'll be roughly between 100 and 120 temporary jobs during the construction phase. Brandy's going to give, she's director of operations for our company. She's going to give a little more history, and then I'm going to answer or try to answer whatever questions you ask me.
Good evening. This project aligns with the city goals that have been set forth for public incentives. This is just has been designated a high priority site under the Downtown Lawrence Master Plan. It is redevelopment of a currently dilapidated structure while preserving the historical integrity. It maximizes the existing infrastructure and is infill development that will bring life back to this property. It also supports the economic and social vibrancy of downtown and emphasizes downtown as a hub for employment, and expands on jobs and creates jobs that are in excess of the current median income. This will be a $5.1 million investment, with residential development being encouraged as the new workers relocate here to Lawrence. It'll also increase opportunities for our local construction partners. We're currently going to partner with Alpha Roofing, Select One Security, Lynn Electric, and AirTech for different stages of the project. It increases the local median income and increases sales tax revenue and increases the downtown daytime population to encourage and support local business. Why is there a need for the NRA? Well, we've had a new reason creep up since we started this project. When we started, interest rates started with a 3, interest rates now start with an 8. That 65% that we've reduced to is basically the bottom number. When our CFO went back through and ran the numbers with the new interest rates, 65% was the absolute bottom line to get this project going. First Management obviously is a property management company. They rely on rental income as their fees for properties. And when COVID hit, KU shut down, the students went home, whether they had leases or not, they didn't care. Construction, we had projects delayed, canceled, supply chain problems, and staffing problems. We are starting to see recovery from this. However, we have major concerns in the construction division due to these interest rates continuing to rise if we're going to see more projects that are delayed. And as I said, this is a 15-year request for 65% NRA. One of the questions I know that's been talked about is why this property? It was designated an opportunity site by the Downtown Lawrence Master Plan. And when you review the master plan, their recommendation for the site is to raise the entire site and redevelop it as a multi-use facility using more of the property than is currently used. The neighbors find that very unappetizing to have a larger, taller, bigger structure on that site. That's why we think that despite what Downtown Lawrence Master Plan says, that it is a better idea to stay within the existing footprint and redevelop as is and not encroach on those single-family homes that are along Rhode Island Street. So happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
I can't imagine if we would follow the downtown master plan. If I couldn't get a grocery store 3 times by being sued by the neighbors, I doubt I could raise the building and develop that site and avoid litigation.
Questions, commissioners?
Doug, do you want to tackle kind of the question that I had about the history of the property taxes, annual taxes and the valuations over the last 5 years or so?
Well, so I really wasn't involved with that. Mike Trainer, one of my partners, was, and I don't think for all those years he paid attention to the increased value of that empty building every year. He must have protested it before I bought everybody out, because that happened before September 2022. So I wasn't a part of that negotiation or that conversation with the county appraiser. So that's just being honest and telling you what I know. I assumed that he finally realized that, you know, the taxes went dramatically up over the years. And but when I bought it, if you look at what the taxes are of 2022, that's what they were at the day that I bought everybody out. But I guarantee you, owning enough property in town, I know how fast. When I built High Point Apartments, my taxes were 70 grand a year, and after 20 years, they were 200 grand a year.
We don't get many developers here, Doug, so
What's that?
we don't get many developers here. So I have a few questions about development and sort of the choices you made around this project.
Okay.
You know, I'm sure you're aware that there's a big demand for affordable housing. It's a big topic in this space quite often. To me, this NRA would have been a slam dunk if any affordable housing was included in it. You build quite a significant amount of housing in Douglas County. Can you talk to me about why maybe affordable housing wasn't included in this?
I'm actually I'm working with the city right now, trying to do affordable housing. The city came up with a list 2 years ago of land that the city owns, different tracts around Douglas County. And so I went down and met with the city manager twice, last Monday and the Monday before, and to try to negotiate one of those sites to do affordable housing. I mean, I feel pretty strongly about doing that. I've been doing this for 35 years. And I think it'd be kind of nice if I did something different. And I would like to jump on that goal of the city to do affordable housing. So we're in negotiations on some of those sites with the city right now. But yeah, I would like to do it. And I'm currently working on it.
Great. I'm going to ask my question again. On this site, you chose not to do it. Can you
But we
just tell me
tried.
what you tried to
We
do?
tried and got
Okay.
sued because the neighbors in Hobbs State Loft, we were blocking their view of the grain elevators in North Lawrence.
Okay.
So our goal all along was to go up. That's what I did at 901. That's what I
Right.
did at the Marriott. That's what I did at 888, where the Great American Bank is. Pachamama's, when I bought that restaurant, I built 4 stories on top of it. It's exactly what I wanted to do on the Borders building. You know, and after being in court for 3 years and going all the way to the Supreme Court, I mean.
Okay.
That makes it difficult.
Yeah. And none of the properties that you own currently in Douglas County were built under being affordable housing. Is that correct?
Well, no, we qualify for
50% of our stock of housing falls under the affordability guidelines by the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority.
and we have provided them with those units for them to send people our way.
Other questions?
So if I heard city staff earlier, right, you know, each independent governing body has the authority to vote yes or no on this request and even change the percentage amount if we saw fit. If you were if you didn't have approval from all three bodies, does that impact your plans for this project?
It absolutely would. I mean, if interest rates were back at 3%, I might have a different answer for you. But to go from 3% to 8.5 to 8.75% on a $5.1 million investment, I mean, just the interest carry costs alone, this will be 300% higher than it was a year and a half ago. And construction costs are up 30% too. I'm sure the county sees that and all the stuff that you guys are doing from a construction standpoint. I mean, steel's up 40%, construction materials up 30%. Laborers used to be $15 an hour, they're $25 an hour now. If you can find them. So to answer your question, I really need all three bodies. This is a tough project.
So in the staff report, one of the things we look at is, does it bring in business? And I think it included in the staff report, you have some contracts in Kansas City that necessitate you adding these employees. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, we have 3 or 4 present work companies here. I think we have 3 or 4 apartment complexes being built in Kansas City right now. We have some in Denver, Colorado, and we have a project in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We're trying to do more here.
Yeah.
No land. I like doing projects in Lawrence.
Yeah.
I've
Well,
done.
actually, my point was it's good to bring in business. I mean, it's good to have employees that are working for outside areas, right? That's part of the incentive and what we're trying to do. My question is that if you didn't do this project, would you cancel those? Would you not have the ability to do those contracts? I mean, do you need these people here to do those contracts? Or because I think I asked you at PERC, is there no other space in Douglas County where you could do this? And you said this was the one that we've got to do it at this space. And so I'm interested, if we don't approve it, do you cancel those contracts and that money doesn't flow into?
I mean, I guess
Douglas
we could
County.
open an office in Kansas City
Yeah.
and hire Kansas City employees. But right now we dispatch dozens and dozens of people from Lawrence, Kansas every day to Kansas City. Our plumbing company, our painters, our superintendents, our laborers to clean up job sites. They all live in Lawrence. They go to Kansas City to work on our projects. They come back every night to Lawrence, Kansas.
Thank you.
But yeah, for the amount of office space we need, where is there a building in Lawrence? I mean, we were at 901 New Hampshire above Milton's for 10 years, and we outgrew that space. We had 10,000 square feet. We built a new facility in the county up north of TP Junction, and we outgrew that space. We're in 4 different locations right now, so you know how inefficient that is. I got corporate people in a old bank building at 23rd and Castle. I've got our construction division in another building. I never moved my lawn and landscape out to my ranch that I got that special use permit. I ended up renting a warehouse on the east side of town. And so we moved our plumbing company and our lawn and landscape out there. So I went through all that brain damage to get that special use permit, and then it was just too far to travel where that was. It was on the west side of Clinton Lake, in the travel time versus renting a warehouse right over here off 23rd Street,
Any further questions, commissioners? Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for letting us come down here.
Okay, we'll take public comment on this item. Is anyone here to provide public comment?
My name is Gene Dorsey. I'm a resident of Lawrence, Kansas. I'm speaking as a private citizen and not on behalf of any boards I've been appointed to. I think this is a good project. In talking to people out in the county, especially people over 65, on limited incomes, property taxes are a real burden on them. While this doesn't provide much relief, $6,000 is $6,000. The project renovates a prime corner of downtown. It's going to bring in more employees to downtown to have lunch and do their shopping. And I think approval of this project would also send a message to other companies who may be looking to relocate in Lawrence as part of the Panasonic project and expansion throughout the area, that Douglas County welcomes other headquarters to their downtown and Douglas County. So I'm supporting it. Thanks.
Good evening, commissioners, staff. Hugh Carter with the Chamber of Lawrence. Just wanted to speak briefly and, selfishly as a neighbor of this property, we've been looking, our offices have floor to ceiling windows that look directly at this building in our parking lot. And in the last couple of years, not only has it just been kind of that sad view of this vacant building, but we've also daily, it's one or multiple people that are camping, a lot of trash, the bus stop that's right in front of that, I think largely due to the lack of activity at the property, has become a place that's also inhabited typically by folks that are asleep and their belongings and whatnot, almost kind of becoming a home. So that for a lot of reasons, we'd love to see that redeveloped. And of course, the other is this benefit to downtown, thinking that first, density downtown is the ultimate solution. It's downtown is one of our two greatest assets, I think, between that and the university, and anything we can do to help downtown thrive is important. So density is key. Having people live downtown is great. And building up is going to be important. In this case, I think the developer pointed out that was a challenge and fought by neighbors. And so the next highest best use of that property, to be able to get 80 to 100 people downtown, I think is a real boost for downtown. And at some point, it's going to be more than just restaurants and retail. As we really get density up, eventually you're going to start seeing more services downtown. It may be more likely we'd see grocery stores and other things we'd like to see. So for that reason, I think it really makes sense. And in addition to the building just being revitalized and put back into being a productive building, we are going to, and I appreciate a lot of great questions here, but we will see incremental tax revenue in the meantime while downtown receives all these other benefits. And then, of course, long-term, the benefit really kicks in when the abatement gets finished. But not only is the applicant taking on, because a couple of reasons I think this is a little unique. The applicant is taking on those additional expenses to maintain the historic elements of the building and improve those historic elements as well. But I know personally, even, just myself, we own a commercial office space, or part owners of. We went under contract just before, as you know, there were a couple of banks that actually went bankrupt 6 months or so ago, while interest rates were already kind of skyrocketing. There is this challenge that since COVID, when it comes to commercial office space, what happened is this just fell out from being under contract because the banks wanted to reevaluate. They have very little appetite for risk when it comes to commercial office because there is a challenge of getting people back to work. And so this developer is inheriting and taking on some additional expenses here to maintain historic elements, bringing some, I think, much needed density downtown, and then also absorbing massively increased interest rates, construction costs, supply chain issues, and the fact that banks right now, it's very difficult to get them to finance these things. So I would just throw in that from a timing standpoint, this one also for me feels like the need is very real from the developer standpoint. And if we don't do this, take advantage of this now, I'd be concerned about how long it might take for something, you know, and the developer might finally just look to sell the property, but how long would that take? If it's not going to be able to be built up and made into affordable housing, then who knows how long it continues to sit. So thank you very much.
Any other public comment? Anyone online? Okay. Close public comment, bring it back to the commission for discussion and or motions.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would start with the things that I like about it, if you're ready to hear that. I do like the opportunity to add to commercial tax base. It's something that I think we've been talking about as a commission and will continue to talk about in terms of what the burden is on residential taxes, because Douglas County is just not pulling its weight in terms of commercial and residential, commercial and industrial lots. So I like that we have the chance to get another property back on the rolls, pulling its weight. I remember when that conversation, when Borders was looking to come in, and the conversation about keeping that livery wall and that piece of history, and kept it, but kind of in a strange state that it's propped up by sticks. So it was an odd compromise what we got out of it. So I do like that there is an opportunity to maybe keep that and stabilize it and have it for real, especially if there is kind of conversations or movement about knocking that down and starting over. There's a flip side to that I'll get to in a minute. I do like the downtown revitalization. Our downtown will take, it'll take work. It'll take us caring about it. There are a great many properties that are vacant and around downtown, and we can't have any more of them. So I think maybe starting to move the needle on getting some momentum there is an all right thing by me. Some things that I had questions about that I feel like I've gotten sufficient answers. So these are things not, reasons that I love the project, but reasons that I am, things that I'm becoming comfortable with. One is the state of the property. I had a lot of questions about that and how it got there. And I think I understand that better with the kind of course of the contracts and litigations and such. Another was the property tax history, and I very much appreciate our new appraiser, Brad, taking a lot of email questions from me through the course of the week. And Sarah kind of bring it back that, the property tax at the start is what we get to go on. And I think I understand how it got to where it is now, and I'm comfortable with that. I also think that going from a 90% request to a 65% request helps me out a lot, because I think within that 35% that we gain within each of the first 15 years is probably about what we could expect to see if the property stayed vacant and the land value just rose. So that gives me some comfort that we're not losing, we're not gaining. At that 15-year mark, 16-year mark, then that comes on the tax rolls for real, and I like that. So these are always the long game. It's a little longer long game than I'd like to see. Be more comfortable at 10 years, but that item for discussion. And I'm not weighing as heavily kind of the aspects about the business itself. I feel like that's not necessarily in our purview to choose winners and losers, but to look at what are the dollars for the community. So I'm basing my decisions on that and not on necessarily what the applicant brings in terms of jobs and other things. Though I have to flag that we have a lot of conversations about businesses and headquarters that ought to occur in the city limits that are instead occurring out in the county. And this is a chance to flip that and bring a business with a fair amount of traffic and trucks and such from the unincorporated area back into the city. So I've covered those, and we'll get to the other side of it when somebody wants to take that on.
Well, I think this project sort of tends to show the competing values that we have as a community when we think about wanting infill development, And then we have a developer who wants to do infill development and bring something downtown. And I don't think it's any surprise to Doug to hear that there are people who don't think that should happen. And, you know, we want to see our downtown vibrant and we want to see it thriving. And yet when someone says, hey, I want to bring my business downtown, then we say, well, that person shouldn't get to have any breaks. I think it's important to understand how hard it is to develop downtown. We've had a number of projects that have come downtown that have seen significant pushback. And so I think similar to Commissioner Willie, that's a pro on this for me, is bringing, you know, business back to downtown, bringing commercial business. You know, we really don't have a ton of this kind of, we have a lot of retail downtown, but when it comes to commercial office space, we don't see a ton of that downtown. You know, I think I hinted at, I would really have loved if this second floor was affordable housing as well, but I understand that's not in the cards on this one. I think when I really did the math, and I sort of hinted at this earlier, I think it's important to talk about what the real impacts are. You know, when we talk about the benefit here being $11,000 per year to the applicant, I don't think we had a single budget request this year that was $11,000. I mean, it's not a big amount of money. And yet I think the applicant is taking on a lot of the additional cost. And if they don't do anything on this project, we don't get the $5,000 or $6,000 to Mr. Dorsey's point earlier. So when this came to PERC, I think we missed a lot of the important narrative that was shared tonight about the litigation and what's happened to the property over time. I'm not totally comfortable with the idea of, you know, this being a dilapidated building. And I do believe that the owner maintains some responsibility from keeping it becoming dilapidated. And while he was a partial owner, he was an owner of it. That's the part that makes me uncomfortable. This does bring more jobs in, not a whole lot of jobs, but it does bring jobs that, as the applicant said, could go to Kansas City or other places. So I think there's some benefit there. I'm leaning towards approval, I will say that, but I want to hear from my colleagues and continue to discuss it.
I think, you know, my fellow commissioners bring up some valid points about some benefits that I can see that are clear to me about this project as a whole. But I have to say, what I'm not sure about is that it's a significant enough sort of return on investment for us when I compare that to the amount of work that it requires on county departments and county staff to manage these over that 15-year time. And I heard it's been a few years since we've had any of these in front of us, but heard that there are sort of more coming down the pipeline. And so that's a part of the weight for me, is the amount of impact it has on county staff for what is calculated as an estimated total of $680,000 in rebated taxes, and so benefits over time for the developer. And I also, I'm struggling a little bit with whether it really quantifies much community benefit, because I understand that it will bring additional jobs and additional bodies downtown on a regular basis into that office space for one company, and that will generate some additional economic impact on the downtown district. But I have to say, I don't know that it's that's impossible to expect in the future from this site. I guess, sorry, that wasn't very clear. I think that I am not convinced that that's a significant enough economic impact, or that it's not possible to achieve that with other properties or other potential projects at this property to generate more employees and office space downtown. And I understand the history of the litigation and the starts and stops to try and get a grocery store there, and that's it's a relevant factor in this particular project or site in our community. But I do struggle with the notion that it sets a precedent for developers, for investment groups or single owners to sit on a property, bring down the tax value, both through, not actively improving that property, as well as, again, which is people's rights to protest their tax payments and get a different, an adjustment to the valuation. I don't know. I'm just struggling to feel that there's a real cost benefit and return on investment for this particular project. It's a little hard for me to believe that the project is not possible to go on without the $680,000 total from our 3 governing bodies, or which I think I understand tonight, if only if we weren't to pass it, but the other 2 were, that lowers the amount, but still could give some benefit. So I'm struggling to want to support this. Open to hearing more thoughts or discussion amongst commissioners.
I would kind of echo, I've been on much the same journey and asked many of those same questions, and probably landed more on the knowing how hard infill is. And I think any of us, if we could brainstorm, like what's the best use any of us could figure for that property, we might come up with other things that are different, but that's not what we get that's brought to us. So I think that the good does outweigh, and the county does gain. So I think that's the part that sometimes that gets lost in the community conversation, is that we are bringing new things onto the tax rolls that will be of a tax benefit to especially residential homeowners for the long term. But I certainly understand where you're coming from.
And I'll just say, sorry, I lost my train of thought on one thought earlier, which is I'm finding a little bit of incongruency in the notion that that your company is growing and needs to add additional employees and needs better space to consolidate those employees. And I understand those pressures, while also hearing as part of your presentation that interest rates are a big piece of the puzzle. And I certainly understand the pressure that imposes, but the, implications that COVID had on rental income. And I think that it was inferred that that has had impact on just revenues in general for your company, but you're also a growing company. So that feels a little incongruent to me, which makes me question whether or not, the total $680,000 that this would give back over time is really necessary to propel the project forward. And if I'm being honest, the way that I think about NRAs, especially taking into account the amount of work that it requires of county staff over time, is I just want to see that there's, I guess, a bigger reason for it, or a project that really could not be possible and the benefits are too significant to, let go of. And therefore that helps justify the amount of administrative labor that's required. So that's part of the equation in my head.
Yeah, I have struggled with, will it happen anyways with that argument, especially because, and I don't know if this was the way it was supposed to be done, but with the school district and the city already approving it, and just looking at the total dollar amount, it seems so small to me that the investment couldn't be made. I really wish there was a I'm interested to hear from Commissioner Willie. She sort of teased that she had some thoughts around the historical piece of it, because I'm looking for a community benefit here for tax incentives. You know, historical structures are very important in Douglas County. And so, you know, Mr. Carter referenced the fact that the applicant is taking on the additional costs for maintaining historical structure. I don't know a ton about the livery wall, but I've never really personally seen it as a historical structure, but I understand those are those who do. I'm interested to hear from Commissioner Willie, because that is an added benefit, that is an added cost that the applicant is taking on. You seem to say you had some history and concerns about that.
I probably covered most of the history I have with that, and just I lived a couple blocks from there when that was being built, and I remember that discussion being how do we bring in something new that was an outside company and have them also honor a piece of Lawrence history, because I think the intention was that they wanted to buy the property and knock it down, which is the cheapest way to go, and still is the cheapest way to go. So I think that that's kind of the competing value we've got here, is that if we want to do infill in downtown, that infill can be new, and new is cheaper, or it can be perhaps with some incentive, a reason to keep a historic portion too. I mean, it's probably an awkward piece to build around, just from looking at it, that it's kind of a unsupported, nearly unsupported wall. But it would be, if it's been kept this long, it would be kind of a shame to miss out on an opportunity where that could be incorporated into a modern structure, stabilized.
Do you remember, Commissioner Willie, if like Lawrence Preservation Alliance or any organized efforts were part of that conversation in order to keep that wall there when borders came in? Do you recall that amount of detail?
I wasn't involved at that level. I think logically, probably so. I think there had to be a significant community pushback in order to get it to happen. The biggest community conversation I remember was about the big tree. Remember the big tree there?
Me too.
So
Yes, I wrote a high school newspaper article about the tree sitter on the other end of the block. So I do recall.
Sarah, there's been some discussion about fees, and you seem like you wanted to jump in earlier there, and I want to give you an opportunity. I mean, that seems to be a conflict point for Commissioner Reed. I don't want to speak for her, but that's something she's asked about. Do you want to have a chance to speak on that?
Yeah, you know, and I guess what I would say is that I think it would be difficult to calculate a fee that really adequately accounts for the cost. Some of this is just simply the job of maintaining a tax roll and maintaining tax incentives. I wish that somehow the process could be more automated. But almost every state, and actually, as I've mentioned before to this group, Lawrence uses the Neighborhood Revitalization Act statutes completely different than most of the rest, every other place I know of in Kansas. So it is difficult for us to do any of these in some sort of automated systematic process there. So it's mostly my just frustration at that process, and that it is a lot of work. That being said, it is also part of the job of maintaining a tax roll. So I'm sure if we went back to the city and said for future NRAs, we want to adjust the amount, we could, and I think they would be amenable to that change. I think we did up it a couple years back. You know, maybe it is time to look at it again if there are more coming online. Because I mean, there are quite a few of these now between all the active ones and Baldwin, and has the NRA for the entire community. So I guess I do want to say it's a lot of work, but I'm not sure I could come up with a fee that really meets that need. Is that fair?
I mean, it helps me know like
Yeah.
where things stand, and that you know, perhaps some continued conversation specifically of the number of them are going to.
I guess I would
increase.
worry that if you wanted to do a different time period. I mean, that was my concern really
Sure.
at that point is I would want to check the statute that we could do that. And how, and we would probably need to amend the documents, but I know we've done that kind of stuff in the past. So it was more well, before we have a completely customized for each governmental entity, let's take a moment.
And I heard you loud and clear
Thank
on
you.
that, so appreciate it. And I'd also, you did mention the Baldwin Rural Housing Incentive District that we did approve. And we approved the district itself, but those projects have yet to come to us. Is that right?
Yeah, that actually Baldwin has both an NRA district for its community and a rural housing incentive district. Their NRA district has been in place for a number of years, and we have a number of properties that are, and those are that are already receiving rebates as a result of that.
And they continue to be a valuable economic development tool.
Yeah, it's like, as Britt said, it's a great tool. It's very flexible. I just wish there were. This is something every county in Kansas struggles with, is that these are just, they're hard to maintain. But I do think that's part of our responsibility.
Yeah, I'm really struggling with this because when I total up the total amount of tax incentive from the county, and I heard Commissioner Reed sort of say it was 680,000, and that's already been, you know, a third of that has already been decided by the city and the county and the school board. You know, the total impact to the county is about 200,000 is my number. And so what I'm trying to calculate in my head, is it worth $200,000 to bring additional tax revenue on to the roles that we don't currently have in commercial? Is it worth $200,000 to, over 15 years, to bring 15 more employees downtown? And is it worth $200,000 to do some more infill development? It's not a huge I mean, I don't want people to hear me say it's not a huge dollar amount, but considering what we spend on some other things, it's not over a span of 15 years. It's not a huge number to me. And so, you know, and then when I say that, I struggled knowing the applicant's resources, and no, I don't know what his checkbook is or anything like that, but would they do the project anyways when the delta is $200,000? That's where I'm stuck right now.
So I'm not sure I'm comfortable being in a guessing game of, you know, what's the
Right.
magic number. It's easier to build other places. So I guess I think that's the gain for this project, is that we get this project, as opposed to, you know, will that stay in Lawrence? Will it be in Kansas City? That's a guessing game that doesn't interest me. But this, you know, this is the known, is this project would, I mean, this corner of downtown would get the attention that it needs. I would say that the math in terms of it's not giving away 200,000. It's that we otherwise would have. It's giving away 200,000 that we wouldn't have in exchange for the income that we are receiving and will receive more fully after year 16 and beyond. So the lifespan of this project is far longer. I mean, the lifespan of the tax roll of this project is far longer than the incentive that's being requested.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, we've had other infill development projects that haven't asked for NRA tax incentives and still done the work and still added employees and still increased the tax rolls. So that's just the challenge. I think one of Commissioner Reed's concerns, I was compelled by Commissioner Willie's discussion around what is the value of holding onto a property to let its property value decline. And I think Britt helped me with that as well. And just thinking, I don't think it would make fiscal sense to hold on to it, to go through this process to hope. I mean, that's a long shot bet, you know? And so I think I've abandoned my thinking around that. So. It sounds like we're going to need a motion at some point, or we'll just talk this thing to death and bore people, and we need to make a decision.
Well, I would just say I hear all the points. I don't know that it convinces me personally, but I think what I'm hearing from other commissioners is that the positive impacts outweigh concerns that maybe were had at the beginning of this meeting. I'll take a shot in the dark, and I'm going to make a motion to deny the public incentive review. Is that right? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to make a motion to deny the, sorry, this is a strangely worded motion. That's why I'm getting tripped up just a
I think you
moment.
could deny the recommendation from the Public Incentive Review Commission.
Yep, the wording of it was just tripping me up. I apologize. Try a third time. Move to deny, it wasn't a recommendation from PERC. That's what I'm getting stuck on.
I
That's
think you
the
could
part
deny
that-
the county's consideration in a 15-year, 65%.
Okay. Move to deny the county's participation in a 15-year, 65% neighborhood revitalization area for First Management, Inc. to redevelop an office headquarters at approximately 700 New Hampshire Street.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, there's no second. Make a motion to approve, to accept the recommendation and approve a public incentive review committee and city county participation in a 15-year, 65% neighborhood revitalization area for First Management to redevelop an office headquarters at approximately 700 New Hampshire Street.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Reed was correct that we're actually,
Oh, yeah, it's
Against the PERC,
backwards.
yeah.
I will draw my motion.
Thank you for, I'm not the only one that got tripped up on that.
Yeah. So let me try that again. Going to make a motion to approve a public incentive request and county participation in a 15-year, 65% neighborhood revitalization area for First Management to redevelop an office headquarters at approximately 700 New Hampshire Street. Get that right?
second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Passes 2-1.
I apologize for that motion. That's my fault.
I don't know. I don't think you knew.
I edited it last minute and we had to correct it. So I do know that I do think I messed some of that up for you.
All right. Move on to our next agenda item, which is for history of temporary business uses. This is something we've talked about quite a bit here. Sorry for those of you who don't want to hear that discussion.
Oh, they're fun. Commissioners, I've had some conversations with planning staff. Carl Bauer from our planning department is here and County Counsel John Bullock is here. I think we kind of want to, we have a few comments for you. We'd like to walk, I think Carl's got some information to walk you through. And then really, we're here to sort of help facilitate a conversation and a discussion with the commission about where you want us to go from here on. So I don't anticipate that we will resolve this issue tonight. I have a feeling that we'll get some more information from you and then staff can go back and make additional recommendations. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Carl.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. I just have a brief PowerPoint summarizing the memo that I have included in your packet. So just to summarize quickly, over the past couple of months, I've been doing some research on temporary business uses in the county. I scanned in all of our paper files, and put together a spreadsheet with just some basic information on each of those temporary business uses. So just a quick history. The first point that I realized during my research is that temporary business uses are nothing new. There's over a 50-year history of them. The earliest one that we have in our records is for an asphalt plant that was approved in 1973. So while TBUs aren't new, there have been some questions raised about why are there so many of them and why are they more frequent recently. So I have a chart there of how many temporary business uses were considered per year. And you can see two big peaks in there. That first peak in 2013 and 2014, a lot of that was related to construction for the K-10 highway projects. And then more recently with the geotechnical testing and the meteorological testing related to potential renewable energy projects. Approving TBUs with lists of conditions is nothing new. So that first TBU that I mentioned from back in 1973, that was approved with 8 conditions. And most of the TBUs that I looked through, I was able to look at a lot of the minutes. I was able to look at a lot of records of decision, and they often had lists of conditions attached to them. Permitting intense land uses as temporary business uses is also nothing new. They've been approved for some very low impact uses, corn mazes, fruit sales, but also some very intense land uses like borrow pits, open burning, asphalt plants, concrete plants, music festivals, conferences, some of which had thousands upon thousands of people in attendance. Neighbor notification, that is relatively new. That appears to have started in 1992. Letters originally were sent to people who owned property within 1,000 feet of the activity. Today, we send those letters out to landowners within half a mile. The length of a temporary business use permit, how long it's valid, that also varies widely. It's from as long as a couple hours to a day to up to about 3 years. We also have some precedents for renewing a temporary business use permit. Some of those early TBUs, especially for the asphalt plants, those had to come back before this body approximately every 2 years. If you're looking at that spreadsheet that I put together, you'll notice that from 2001 to 2013, every year there was an application for a dried fruit and nut sale along Highway 59. So that had to come before this body every year. The regulations changed. And now that's approved administratively as a special event permit. And the applicant does still apply for that every year. And then as far as next steps, there might be some potential policy changes in the future. Something we've discussed internally is maybe moving some of those lower intensity uses like a flea market, filming a commercial, something like that, over to an administrative process like a special event permit. We also might look at creating standards for geotechnical or other environmental testing. And then finally discussing what temporary means. We don't really have a definition for temporary in our regulations for temporary business uses. So how we've kind of interpreted that as a year, maybe a little longer, but again, there's no definition. So really it has a defined start date and it has a defined end date. So with that, I'm available for any questions. And we're also kind of looking for some guidance as to where you'd like to see temporary business uses go in the future.
I'll start by saying that Fruits and Nuts is a local institution. I'm glad to say, I remember when some of that process was, just from the applicant, from the owner, and kind of hearing how that process changed and became administrative. So I think we are seeing it, and I love the history. So thank you for bringing that to us. How it kind of breaks into maybe some somewhat natural groups in terms of things that are very short term, that are maybe, event based or appropriate in the unincorporated area, lower traffic volume kinds of things that maybe that could move toward the administrative approval, and some of these things that are just bigger. So I also really liked hearing that it has been normal for us to put conditions on TBUs, because I think that was a discussion that came in the last time of if we're putting conditions on it, is it still a TBU? And I'm uncomfortable having anything that is always just a yes, no with no flexibility, because I think that doesn't give us the opportunity to hear from the public and respond to the public, because sometimes there are things that we can solve a particular concern without saying no, and having that power to do that on the fly means a lot to me. Some of that discussion that fueled this was what's the difference between what should trigger a CUP and what should trigger a temporary business use. And I think that might be part of the discussion we have tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I understand how we've used it, and I've had discussions with Sarah about this, how we've used temporary business use permits, and, for something like an asphalt plant, that can be a long time there. But I do think that the public has some expectation of the word temporary. And while we may see 15 years as being temporary, I'm not sure the public has the same sense. So, if you're looking for guidance from me, one thing I'd like to see is limiting a temporary use permit to a year, and then renewing after that. I think, we always have sort of that tension around even CUPs, and when's the time to revisit a CUP? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? But I do think that, typically in the majority of those, when they come back around 5 years later, people are okay with it, but they knew that they had the opportunity to weigh in again if it came back around. So I think that gives the public some comfort in, one, what is really temporary, and two, that I'll have a chance to weigh in again if something wasn't as promised or as expected.
Yeah, I had a similar line of thinking, Commissioner Kelly, and just it does feel important to put some sort of limit to how we define temporary, like a threshold that can tell staff when things tip towards this should be a CUP. And some CUPs are, I mean, theoretically relatively short, right? Somebody could ask for it. Some CUPs are only 5 years, but with annual reviews. Some CUPs are 20 years with 5-year reviews. So it's all relative in that sense. I think it would be helpful for us in future commissions to have some sort of bright line threshold like that. I would be interested to hear back from staff if, I wasn't, 1 year is one idea I had, 2 years maybe, because your point number 5 is that the longest is approximately 3 years for a TBU. And I don't, did you say what that was or what some examples of that was? I'm trying to think of like what uses might more than a year be necessary, but still an argument can be made that it's temporary, that it wouldn't be anywhere close to 5 years if there's some particular uses that fall into that.
I think there were 4 or 5 that were approved for 3 years. The longest of those was for a solar meteorological measurement station. That temporary business use is still in effect. That's a machine sitting out in the field. It doesn't make any noise, doesn't generate any light or anything. The other ones that went on for about 3 years were the borrow pits during the K-10 highway construction.
I have to say, I mean, I really appreciate this discussion, and it's just helpful to sort of define what we mean so that we know what we're saying to the public when they come with whatever type of request it is. And part of my hope is that it helps staff in the long run to be able to more clearly sort of push things in one direction or the other based on those initial conversations you have with applicants. And I agree with Commissioner Willie that I appreciate knowing that it's always been part of the history to add conditions, and that's just a per application and per commission decision. But knowing that precedent has been there for a long time. so I think I would just be interested to hear feedback and future conversations from staff about what they think a sort of maximum amount of time to be considered temporary is. I just find the conversation about temporary and permanent and things like that always interesting in terms of legal definitions. And part of this got me thinking, I'll just share it. Like in my other job, where I work a lot with folks looking to obtain protection orders in the state of Kansas, the statute calls it a permanent protection order if you're awarded one, but permanent means 1 year. So, well, I'm sorry, it recently was updated to a maximum of 2 years, but it's this interesting language that people really lob onto the word permanent and feel like that must mean lifetime and truly permanent. And in fact, it means a maximum of 2 years. So anyway, I just mentioned that because I think language is important, and sometimes defining words and not assuming what people's relative basis for that is important. And like I said, hopefully helpful to staff. Also, I really enjoyed your spreadsheet, Carl. I know I told you that on the way into the building, but it was really fun for me to read through. There, I've got a list of some movies from the 70s and 80s that I need to go look up that filmed in Douglas County. I looked at Pendleton's corn mazes are all over it. So anyway, it was fun to read through that, and I really appreciate the amount of labor that went into organizing all that information for staff to review.
One of the things that occurred to me, commissioners, as I read through it was, sort of this, some of the temporary use permits adapt the actual space that it's, they have an impact, a physical impact on the space they're in. So for example, a borrow pit or an asphalt or concrete plant is going to permanently change that space. Whereas some of the meteorological things that we've seen recently is not going to permanently change the space. And that was one for me, a film permit is not going to permanently change the space. And I think on one that we had recently, I want to be careful here talking about this, but it significantly changed the space, which made me think it was not temporary. I couldn't see how we were going to undo something to make it temporary. And I don't know, Carl or John, I see you here. And since we're paying you for your time, I want to make sure you have a chance to talk. Is that something that we maybe want to consider?
That's something else that I was thinking about. Some of those ones that definitely have a permanent impact, maybe changing the way we phrase those, changing the way we permit those. That's something worth considering, I think.
I'll muddy the waters just a little bit for some that kind of fall in between that. And one would be the Luke Bryant concert, and one would be the German Baptist gathering, which all, funny enough, happened within about 1.5 miles of each other, where the land was seeded, but it was also, there was a lot of impacts on the land. There were actually structures built for the German Baptist gathering that were then taken away. So there were a lot of changes and a lot of, soil compaction kind of impacts on the land, but then it was tilled back up and put back into a similar state. Similar to that, not quite. That's why it's the muddy part, would be like borrow pits and filling, that it's the end result to the untrained eye looks the same. So like, does that a permanent, if it's put back to how it was before, is that a permanent change? I mean, to the soil health, it's a long-term change, but to the visual drive-by, it isn't.
And I would say that I think staff has had to deal with that kind of distinction in the past sometimes, I mean, technically you could say a quarry at the end of its life, when you fill it back in and plant grass over it, is temporary. And that's not how we treat quarries.
I want to be clear, quarries are not temporary business use permits. Don't bring that.
But
here.
So, and a lot of stuff off this a lot of things on Carl's spreadsheet now is handled through agritourism and special events. So we've cleared a lot of this sort of off of that consideration. I think I kind of was thinking around the 1-year annual idea. And I could see an applicant though saying, well, I don't want to risk it not getting approved. Well, then that might encourage them to just do it as a CUP, where they could put it the length of term be something more concrete. I mean, so it's really about choices. It's not necessarily like you're not going to get, you won't get to proceed with your project. You would just simply apply as a CUP as opposed to a temporary business use. On the other hand, a year is really quick sometimes for like a construction project, like a borrow pit or something like that. You know, I don't think staff would want to go over 3 years. I mean, I think 3 years is just something above that. We would probably, to us, that has been the sort of de facto dividing line. And like we said, we have had some CUPs that really go away after 5 years. So, I mean, I kind of am leaning towards, if you want to be a little stricter in what I'm hearing is there's a desire to tighten down what comes in a TBU. Is that a fair conversation?
I think we've had some that feel like they stretched the bounds of
Okay.
what could be TBU and what the community felt should be TBU. So yes.
And then, but also maybe at the bottom, bottom end, that some things that as staff, we feel administratively could be moved to a special event permit, like the filming, a short-term filming situation that could easily be moved to special event. But like, and I would say like, even under special event, we have, I mean, I think the zoning codes allows us the zoning director, the flexibility of if they think it's too big of a deal, it can come to the county commission, and that's actually the Luke Bryant concert situation is. So obviously, you know, that's a thing as staff, we have the ability to always send it to you if we want to.
And excuse me, sorry about that. With the special event permit, there are certain criteria that need to be met in order for it to be approved administratively. And if those aren't met, they have to come before you.
I was gonna circle back to that part of the memo and suggest that I do think part of this conversation that makes sense and that I'd like to, if commissioners are supportive, encourage staff to do is identify those less intensive uses, those things that make sense to administratively approve and at least help based on this history that you've now developed and have organized a list of sort of common or anticipated uses that make sense administratively just to help. I mean, theoretically, that's more efficient for everybody, right? So that, and on the other end of the spectrum, being able to identify what that threshold is where staff feels like it stops being temporary or it's a more intensive, potentially more permanent land impact than could reasonably be defined as temporary. Off the top of your head, do you know with CUPs about what the like shortest length of a CUP? And I'm looking at Tanya too, just, I know you didn't do that research, but even a ballpark, like is 5 years around what might be the shortest length of a CUP? 1 year?
Yeah,
Okay.
had some really small ones.
Come to the mic.
Fruits and nuts.
I know it's your first time here, Tanya, but you have to use the
I'm
microphone.
gonna make you repeat yourself.
Sorry about that. Tanya Voigt, Zoning and Codes Director. So we have one application that I can think of off the top of my head that right now we have to do an administrative review every single year of it. It's a dog kennel. And then the length is 5 years total, but it feels a little bit like you're doing a CUP every year.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to wait. I appreciate Commissioner Willie's comments about, yeah, these large group gatherings and spaces. And if they build something, if it's a built structure, even if they tear it down, I feel like those shouldn't be a special event permit. I feel like those need to be a TBU, that if they're going to build something, they're going to construct something. And I understand that probably for a film deal, there's probably a space where they're going to build something, but I'm thinking more that will hold a lot of people. I'm just trying to give you some guidance here. That to me sounds like a TBU. I actually would put a borrow pit. I would keep that in a TBU, even though I know it has long-term impacts. I think those are definitions of temporary, you know, it was just while that road was being put in, that's why the borrow bit was there. And once they filled it in, it was done. The ones that I would be interested in moving to CUPs are asphalt and concrete plants, because those have, you know, fairly significant impacts on you know, the truck travel back and forth. And even though they can tear them down, they do also have, you know, quite a bit of impact on the land that they're occupying for long periods of time. So I just want to give you as much clear definition as I can as we talk about this.
I'd like to pick at that one a little bit. I have not been through any of those, so I'm kind of asking here too. But my assumption would be that those only really occur on land that already holds CUPs, so quarries and such. So the truck traffic's already there, the land impact's already there. Is that the
Yeah, we
case?
did an asphalt plant that was essentially on farm ground, if I remember right, Tanya. Yeah, out in near Eudora, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I would anticipate there might be, I mean, anytime K-10 gets redone, it's generally on farmland that they set up a temporary batch plant. We had a long one outside of Eudora for a long time, wasn't it?
That's correct. And there is one that's non-compliant that we're working on having moved off right now. So if you drive down K-10 and see it, we're working with that applicant.
And Highway 59, when that was put in near North 650 Road, was that, I mean, they crushed all their own gravel there for the road. I imagine that was just farm ground before that. Okay, so I correct myself. In terms of time frame, coming into this, I kind of was in the 2 to 3 year range and less comfortable with 3. So like anything that's looking at 3 years, they should probably go through a larger process that also has some land impacts and everything. I do like kind of making a threshold that says that leaves a choice of pathways for some of these to say, hey, if you really think you can be in and out in 2 years, that's one set of discussion. If you're not sure you can be done in 2 years and you're not sure you want to come back and ask with the ability that it might get shut down, then you need to go through the full public process for a CUP. If we want to talk about laydown yards as a particular use.
I don't think we want to talk about, I don't think we want to get that specific because we have one that we've deferred. Is that, I'm going to get John to say something no matter what. Yeah. I mean, we've deferred, so I just think we want to be careful there.
We've
Yeah,
been pretty
I don't-
specific on others too, though.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, did I interrupt you? Yeah, if there's a pending application, you shouldn't be having any discussions of that without notifying the applicant and affording due process. In general, if you want to talk about the topic, you may, but I would advise it could be risky with a pending application if those lines become blurred.
I think maybe we've had enough other conversations that can kind of help guide for the future. It wouldn't impact any applications that are already in process.
I think I also just want to say to staff that part of this like equation, for lack of a better word, about sort of how to adjust things and maybe change structurally how zoning and codes approaches these is wanting to understand if there are any sort of particular reasons for preferring TBUs over CUPs when it comes to some applicants that you think might be, I know, I understand why applicants would refer TBUs to CUPs. And maybe some of those same reasons apply for staff because CUP is a much more involved and longer and fully public. Both of them are fully public processes, but it's longer and more involved. But and I'm not necessarily asking for feedback on that today, but as we continue the conversation, just want to invite staff to share with us if there are sort of reasons to like and prefer TBUs for either particular types of uses, like some of the discussion we're having about what makes sense as TBU or CUP, and that perhaps there's this in between category of where, in your opinion, it can go both ways. That would just be helpful for me because I recognize that CUPs generally create more work or they're a longer process. At least that's what my assumption is when I contrast the two processes side by side. So just want to be sensitive to that too.
I have a process question. So other than involving the planning commission, is there a significantly different amount of work that goes into a TBU versus a CUP?
They still go through the staff review, but the processing time can be a lot shorter. A CUP might take 4 months, but we can get a temporary business use application from the day it comes through our door before you, usually within a month. Sometimes based on applicant availability, staff availability, it might take longer than that.
That's the turnaround time for the applicant. What's the staff hours? Are they the same except for attending a planning commission meeting, which can be not insignificant?
That really depends on the type of application that's coming in.
I would say generally, yeah, a CUP might be more involved, so maybe a little more, but just depends on the. I was trying to look at a couple others of these to sort of see if there were some other sort of distinctions too in there that would be helpful. And I also want to, I remember I do think this, Carl's point about, I think we want to think about use, is that what I'm calling, like, what's Jeff's new term for it? Use standards? Is that what he's calling them? Use standards for geotechnical testing or some sort of testing of soil or land or air. You know, we've had a ton of those recently. I think we have done de facto sort of use standards. That's kind of the terminology we're beginning to use around event centers and possibly equipment storage and landscape. So that's also a way I think like you can have that and still keep it either a CUP or a TBU. And then so in some ways it doesn't really matter. But then that way, we have some consistency as to how we approach those. And I'd say we try to do that, what was the last one of these we did? Let's go back and take a look at it. But I think it's easier for our staff to do that on TBUs. CUPs, because there are so many different planners involved at the city, sometimes it might not be the same. We try to catch that, but it's a little harder at the city.
Can I poke on that just a sec? CUPs then have to run through city staff and TBUs can be processed with zoning and code. So when I'm asking like, what's the difference in staff time? That's a significant difference in staff time because it's not like you get a free pass when the city staff is involved. You also have a lot of legwork to do too. So maybe that's worth us being sensitive about. So leaving the path open for TBUs when appropriate may be important just in terms of the amount of staff time and the community dollars that go into that process.
Okay, staff, do you need more from us?
I feel like we got a lot. Don't you, Carl? Do you feel like you've got enough to
I agree.
sort of modify some of the TBU regulations? And then I think we got quite a bit. I appreciate this. I think this really helpful. Thank you, commissioners.
I really value getting to have these discussions because I think there are things that you struggle with on the staff basis that you're trying to kind of guess what we're going to do, and having a little more direct feedback and maybe some use standards, is that the term, will help us be consistent with the community, as maybe we don't get these every year or every 5 years and we've got changeover of staff and elected officials, just trying to really be responsive to the community about this is what we've heard. Until we hear otherwise, these are the things we will at least consider with uses like this. So I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate all the work. This is a regular agenda item, so I want to make sure we open it up for public comment. Is there anyone here to provide public comment on TBUs?
Chelsea Hayden. I appreciate this discussion as well. And Carl, thank you for the history. It was a fun read and provided a lot of context because I had a lot of questions about TBUs. And how we used them. I think that everything you talked about was great and the things you're looking into are what I was thinking. One question I did have, or one issue I would appreciate you maybe looking into, would be the overlap between a TBU and a CUP and how it may affect a piece of land. So I think often when an application comes in, it's looked at for like, what is that one thing happening in the application? And so if you're going through a TBU process and a CUP process, they might be different parts, as in like a few feet over from each other on the same parcel of land. And they're not always then considered together as like what's going on in this specific piece of property. So my concern would just be, how do we manage people coming through for a TBU and not maybe seeing CUPs then come along behind it that are going to incorporate the TBU into that process? And I'm not 100% positive legally how that would work or how we would change those things, but I'm interested in that. And then also some kind of direction for staff to be able to talk about pending applications regarding a piece of land. So if there is an application or a possible CUP, there's also a TBU, staff has the ability to express that in the discussion or the staff report on either one of those, so that when it does come before a board like the planning commission or something, and they're looking at a CUP, they're knowledgeable about what else is happening on that piece of property if there's a pending TBU. So just the communication and connection between those processes. If that's legally possible, I think it'd be nice to address that. Thank you.
Anything further, commissioners? Okay. Everyone online, Sarah? Should have checked, sorry. All right, that ends our regular business items. We'll move to appointments, and while not having many appointments lately, suddenly we have a couple.
Yeah, commissioners, I sent you 2 requests for 2 Heritage Conservation Council appointments. I don't know if you're ready to review them or not.
Actually, I would say I'm not ready to review. I had looked through the first one. I haven't had a chance to spend the same amount of time with the second one. I do think that there is a deep need to get some rural representation on that board, that one especially. And we are down to 1 out of that board. I didn't see the first applicant, I believe, was a Lawrence resident. The second application, also a Lawrence resident. I'd like to have a little more time, commissioners, and maybe communicate back with Heritage Conservation Council about can we keep some conversation open? I think the one that I reviewed was a fabulous applicant. The second one likely is too, in a different kind of aspect, but I think that's a conversation I'm not ready to give up on until we've given that a pretty good try.
I'm okay with deferral.
Yeah, I'm fine waiting as well. I don't think we had any other appointments, did we, Sarah? Okay, we'll move to Commissioner Administrator Miscellaneous, and Sarah's memo is usually how we begin the conversation.
Thank you, commissioners. Just added some dates coming up for you to take a look at. I do want to say, in terms of upcoming work sessions, we do have a work session next week. So back on the work session schedule. I would say, though, that the memo shows that we have a work session right now on August 30th related to the rural preservation report. That I think is going to get pushed out. I may have something in its place. I don't know yet. So at this point, we just, after this went to print, we've moved that out a little bit further. So I'll keep you posted next week as to what's happening on the 30th. And that's all I have, commissioners.
Thank you. Any other miscellaneous items or questions for Sarah?
I just had a few dates that I wanted to highlight, mostly for Robin's purposes for public notice, well, or just in case other commissioners might be attending. So one thing is on our memo, the ribbon cutting for the Village Green in Eudora, on September 16th. That's a little ways out, but I'll be in attendance to that in case other commissioners plan to attend, let Robin know. And then 2 dates that are coming up a little bit closer are next Friday, August 25th. I plan to attend the Black Business Market that is being hosted by Black 30. Thought other commissioners might also know about that. And then on August 29th, we'll be attending an event in Watson Park that the city and the Kaw Nation is hosting to commemorate the moving of Njuje Wahobe from Robinson Park back to the Kaw Nation. So just wanted to highlight those dates in case any other commissioners were going. Let Robin know. I don't have anything else on my calendar for the next few weeks.
There is a Douglas County Dems function on the 26th that I will be participating in. I don't know if any others would be there.
Not me.
I'm not seeing anything on my calendar that I think will conflict yet. Okay. All right. If that's it, commissioners, we are adjourned.